This podcast is brought to you by Stevie Wicks and by the Goosebumps Crew podcast.
Welcome everyone to this edition, the very special edition of the Arete Podcast. As always, I am your host Jake, and I am joined today by Rabbi Dovid Grossbaum. Did I get that right?
You nailed it.
I'm sorry, I want to pronounce it
According to
completely.
Jewish law, you're now technically Jewish for that pronunciation, so congratulations. No, I'm
Oh,
kidding. I'm
really?
absolutely joking.
Oh, I know. I figured it was a joke. I was like, does that make me a mensch, or there's more to it, right? So anyway, Dovid, as I said, is a rabbi. You're a Chabad rabbi, right? I'm pronouncing that right as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're in the Indianapolis area. You're part of the Young Jewish Professionals of Indianapolis, Indianapolis, not Lish. And it said in your bio, the Hebrew School for the Arts. Do you teach there, or what's your affiliation
Well, it's
there?
really the Hebrew School for the Arts is my wife's baby. I'm a hired hand for all intents and purposes, but she's great. Yeah, she started a Hebrew school from scratch, and it's maybe the biggest in the city now. Just super positive energy, lots of most people will give their reviews of their own Hebrew school experience as super negative, and probably what kind of shipped them away from the synagogue. With her Hebrew school, kids are excited. They're running in, there's crafts, there's fun. We aren't too stuffy. Obviously, still delivering like the rigorous Judaism, but in a more approachable way. So yeah, she's doing great.
Yeah, so just to broaden that for those who may not know, so Hebrew school, it's my understanding, is essentially it's not like I know that there are Jewish day schools, but Hebrew school is essentially just I guess the Christian equivalent to would be like an intense Bible school.
Well, I wouldn't use the adjective intense, but it's pretty much for any Jewish child in the city that isn't going to a full-time Jewish school, but their parents or they want some Jewish education. So they just come by the synagogue once a week for 2 hours and they kind of experience it at different levels. They learn the language Hebrew, but they also learn about the Jewish holidays and the Jewish customs and the Jewish history. We make like Judaic related crafts, sing songs. It's all packed into 2 hours. But, it isn't a replacement for a Jewish day school, but it's the next best thing if you're going to a public or a non-Jewish private school.
Gotcha. And you are also the host of is it the Zal podcast?
Yes, sir. The Zala podcast. If I hijack the hosting, you know why. It's just the it's just
We
the
we
reaction.
yeah, we tend to find each other. It's really there's another podcast host on our network, Justin Spur, and we have dubbed ourselves the problem because if we're ever both guests on a podcast, we unintentionally hijack it and go for way too long. It's become a
Right.
bit of a running gag. So
The
quick.
stand-up comics, they have like wrap it up, red light come up when they're going on too
Oh,
long and they're not funny. You could just
yeah,
get
we
one of
break
those
them.
from me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we break them. We'd break it. Want to do a quick shout out to Chabad.org that actually connected both of us. Found them randomly. They were very helpful for another business venture we did because we were making. I wanted to, make Hanukkah candles. We have a candle company and we do Christmas candles every year. And I said, we really should do Hanukkah candles, but I want to make sure there aren't any, things that we can't use in there. And Chabad not only got back really quickly, they were very helpful. So when I was looking for a rabbi to speak to, I was like, I'll ask Chabad. They'll have me an answer in a day. And sure enough,
That's
the
so
next
cool. Wait,
day,
what's
yeah.
what's the candle company?
Stevie Wicks, all natural soy wax candles. They're probably going to be the sponsor of this podcast, and we are going to have the Hanukkah candles out this year. So after we wrap this up, give me your contact information, and I'll send you the set.
Oh, score. Nice. That's great. Where do you guys produce?
All handmade. So here in Indianapolis.
That's very cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
congratulations on that. That sounds cool.
yeah. We're growing. We're hoping. Every holiday we do a special run of candles, so We're very excited. It's working out great for us this year because, again, if the information I looked up is accurate, Hanukkah begins on the 26th this year.
I think the 25th at night.
Oh,
So
you're
Jewish,
no right. You're right. You're right.
yeah.
It is the 25th. Yeah.
Hmm.
So perfect timing
Yeah,
for
yeah.
us anyway.
Right, exact overlap. I know we're trying to throw all these Hanukkah events, and the exact overlap with Christmas is not throwing a wrench, but it's just kind of like mixing it up. Are people in town? Are they not in town? Can we do the regular
Sure.
parties, or do we have to adopt new ones? We're still kind of figuring it out.
Well, that's an interesting segue into something I didn't even think about until just now. But so some people who are listening to this may not know that Hanukkah follows the lunar calendar. So they're like, wait a minute, what are they talking about? Isn't Hanukkah at the same time?
Oh
And
yeah.
another really bad segue, but it's one of my favorite jokes ever. Many years ago, Stephen Colbert did a Christmas special, and one of the bits was Jon Stewart came by and they sang a song about Hanukkah because the premise is Stephen Colbert's lost his, zest for Christmas, and John he's like, the song is actually called "Can I Interest You in Hanukkah?" And then, it's quite funny. But one of the bits is Stephen goes, "Well, when is it?" And then John goes, "On the 25th of December, Kislev." He's like, "Which is when exactly?" And he just goes, "I'll check." It's a
That's great.
wonderful little
Yeah.
bit.
I
But
need you to come onto my podcast because you're so great
anytime.
at catching the areas that I have like nomenclature for. You know what I mean? Just like referring to Jewish stuff that I expect the audience to know. And you're like, wait a second, I don't think people realize that there's a lunar calendar as opposed to a solar calendar. So great. Yeah.
Yeah, so explain to them like, and Kislev is the way I understand it, it's a month. And is there a Jewish calendar or
Yeah, totally. There's
that's what I
12
thought.
months in the Jewish calendar. You probably would be better off with like a blackboard or something, but in short, each Jewish month has between 29 and 30 days as opposed to like the 30 or the 31. And we go by the moon and not the sun. So the Jewish days begin the night before. And that's why Hanukkah starts the night of December 25.
Oh, that's why. I thought it was because now we're gonna do a deep dive into Hanukkah unintentionally, but I thought it started at night because of it commemorates the Maccabee rebellion, and it was when they locked themselves in the temple, correct? I'm remembering this correctly?
I think they reconquered it.
Yeah. But they stayed there. They were held up in the temple, and they only had enough oil
Oil
for
for
one
one
night,
night.
and it lasted for 8.
Right. No, so every Jewish holiday begins the night before.
Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
Shabbat. Like I don't do any work on Saturday, but the Saturday for me starts Friday night at sundown.
That's funny you mentioned that because I realized I was very excited for this interview, and when I got your email, I was like, great, not realizing that we emailed on a Friday, and then because you were very quick to respond, and then I was like, I responded again, and then I got home, and I'm like, why hasn't responded yet? I'm like, oh, I hope he agrees to come, blah blah blah. And I'm like, oh, it's Shabbat,
Yep, and that would
so
be why.
yeah, that would be why. Well, while we're here and we're educating the people that want to know more about Judaism, what is Shabbat?
All right, so one of the Ten Commandments is to keep the Shabbat. And I think Christians observe the Shabbat for them is on Sunday, but for us, it's kind of more originalist on Saturday, and it means rest. Now, in the active sense, resting means gathering with your family, having good food, good meals, attending synagogue, taking naps. But there's also, and resting for the most part is also what you refrain from. And refraining from work is the major key. Now, what is defined as work involves depth, but in short, the creation of anything new would be rendered work. If I'm creating anything new, that would be considered work, which is forbidden on Shabbat. So, for example, even flicking a light switch or turning on a TV, I won't be able to do on Shabbat because that's creating a circuit or whatever. But if the light switch is on before Shabbat and I didn't have to create that light, I can enjoy the light if it's already on from before Shabbat or if it's on an automatic timer or whatever. So anything that isn't involving the creation of something would be considered resting, and you try to increase the resting as much as possible. I know I'm super grateful for Shabbat because I'm addicted to work and my phone and laptops, and it's really just like a hard cutoff where just spending a lot of time with my children,
Yeah.
praying more than I would, just community and, like organized meals instead of just like grabbing a bag of chips. It's just all really, really great. I feel like Jews throughout history were grateful for Shabbat, but in modern times, it just is become so much more vivid.
Yeah, it's interesting because I enjoy Ben Shapiro's program, and he says that repeatedly. He's like, I'm very thankful for Shabbat because he's like, in a way, it forces me, but I'm grateful for it too. I have to turn all this off so I can imagine. And for those of you listening that, because you mentioned that technically speaking, Christians have a Shabbat, better known as the Sabbath to the Christian community.
Hmm.
Um, Not quite as rigid, although there are some sects of Christianity that are a little bit more. I don't want to say because I don't want to give it a negative connotation. Because I'll be honest, it sounds really good um, for the mind, the soul, all that. Being able
Hmm.
to take a day or yeah, because it's a 24-hour cycle, right? It's sundown on Friday to Saturday on
Yeah, it ends
sundown.
up being 25 hours
25. Okay,
because
yeah.
we're
So, but
erring
it's
on
an
the side
overnight.
of caution of when that day changes. So like the
Gotcha.
beginning
Yep.
of sundown on Friday and the end of sundown on Saturday.
Gotcha. Okay, so that makes perfect sense. But yeah, so the Christian listeners may better understand that concept as the Sabbath, and that's interesting that you said it's about not creating something new. And if I was raised a Christian, so my understanding of the Bible is from the Christian perspective. But as we know, the Old Testament, at least the majority of it, you might be able to educate me more on that. The majority of the Old Testament are Jewish text.
I think all of it. Yeah.
I think all of it is, but as far as because I know, like the Torah is the first five books of the Christian Bible, if I'm not mistaken, and then you have the
The prophets and the writings.
correct, yes. Well, of course you're correct. You're a rabbi. I mean, like I'm thinking correctly. Okay, but yeah, so our understanding is a little bit different, but yeah, so it's amazing to me that there's that commonality in the at least the origins of the faith, and yet it seems that there are times when the Jewish and Christian communities, for whatever reason, just it seems like they should be a little bit closer knit, at least to
Well,
me.
yeah, I hear you. I'd have to think about it. I think in like the classic political parlance, everyone's talking about like Judeo-Christian values or whatnot. So in
Hmm.
that sense, they're linked a lot. And I'm not doubting that there's like a link between them and the Judeo-Christian values, but I feel like it just became like a buzzword where people don't really like reflect on what it means. So
That's
it
probably
is
true.
interesting that you make that. It is interesting that you make that point. I'm not 100% sure. It probably depends with regards to what we're speaking of. And also, I should
Sure.
be clear. I'm describing Shabbat how it's in the text. People fall short of that observance,
Hmm.
because there's like infinite observance levels within the Jewish community. Like for example, I could tell you that in the Torah it says you shouldn't gossip, right? But I succumb to that sin all the time, right? So as a rabbi, it's mostly my job to tell you what you should be striving for, the ideals, but not to judge you in the areas that you fall short.
Well, speaking from experience, there are certain members of the Christian community that should probably take that sentiment to note, to heart. But obviously, since we're on the topic, I can think of no better source than to get just the briefest synopsis of Judaism, not only as a religion, because Judaism's a bit of an interesting one because it's not just a religion, it's not just a group of people, it's kind of both. It's both, it's kind of both, and yet it's also kind of separated. So if you would indulge me, from a rabbi's perspective, what is kind of just like a nice little synopsis of Judaism as a faith?
There are so many different avenues to take, but I guess what's coming to me right now is in Jewish philosophy, the purpose of the creation of the world, in from God's perspective, like why did God start this whole shebang, was to elevate the mundane, was to elevate the mundane. So if God would not have created the physical realm, right, and it just was satisfied with spiritual realms and whatever angels, however they look, probably not in the literal sense, or all the spiritual stuff, he would not have been fulfilled. The concept of creating this world was here's a world where there's physicality and there is difficulty and life is hard and there's temptations and all these things. Um, and humanity still manages to do what's right, act ethically, act spiritually, try to connect to God, all those things. That is a true accomplishment. For an angel to act correct isn't a big deal, right? They're almost robotic. For a human who's, has four crying babies at home or is struggling with the bills or depressed or, all this stuff that life throws at you and still manages to be a good person and kind of be a light to their little circle, that's the purpose for the creation. And in Kabbalistic terminology, it's a dira b'tachtonim. God wanted a dwelling place, like a spiritual, ethical, beautiful dwelling place, but specifically in the lowest of realms. That's the purpose of creation. And pretty much all religions in our book, but for sure all good people, should be pursuing that broadly. Right? Jews pursue it in our own way, and you don't have to become Jewish to join that mission. Jews don't proselytize. We believe that you could be an ethical and great person in the eyes of God. But you do have the mission as a human being for making the world a better place. And that's the purpose. And that's what we're striving toward. And I think even though the daily news may be pulling us down and getting us depressed about the nature of the world, but I think if you zoom out far enough, we are making headway as a humanity as a whole.
I would agree with that sentiment. Yeah, overall, the 24-hour news cycle, which is why I disconnected from it, at least to the degree that I had been consuming it many, many years ago. And I'll say it, I'm happy. And as somebody who talks a lot on the internet these days, I sort of consume news media as a bit of a necessity, just so I kind of sort of know what I'm talking about at the very least, which is why, thankfully, I know very well that I do not have the appropriate level of time to be perceived as an expert when I'm talking about things, but I like to be reasonably informed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but getting away from the 24-hour news cycle is very helpful with one's mental health. But you mentioned converting to Judaism, so you said it's not required, but is it possible for someone to convert to the Jewish faith?
It is possible, but again, Jews don't seek converts. If a convert approaches me as a rabbi, according to the Talmud, you're supposed to turn him away 3 times. In other words, you're trying to vet that the person A is doing it for the right reasons, but B knows that it's going to be difficult, knows that it's going to be difficult. And I think I can't speak for all religions, but as far as I know, Judaism is the one that says you can be totally perfect in the eyes of God without being Jewish. Um,
I
in
can't
other
think of
words,
another, but
right. And I think Christianity and Islam are those are the, major ones, at least in America. Um, you have to accept Jesus or accept Muhammad in order to be, quote, saved. In Judaism, you don't need that. If you're an ethical person, especially if you're spiritually inclined, it doesn't matter at all if you're Jewish or not.
so is the technical term still Gentile?
I mean,
For
people use Gentile all the time for sure. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I don't know if there's another term that's used more in the modern day. Are someone who's not Jewish, are they welcome to, you know, go to a synagogue just to learn, see, ask questions, that kind of stuff?
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And whenever I engage in these types of conversations, man, this one's a little bit more podcasty, but if someone gets super theological with me and they'll call me over and say, Rabbi, I want to grab a cup of coffee, and I discuss my life with you, I'll make it very clear at the outset that my goal is not to convert them because I think that's like some rumbling in the back of someone's mind whenever they're meeting with clergy that, there's just the expectation that like, oh, when are you going to join? When are you going to join? And for me,
Yeah.
it's almost the exact opposite. I think like I've been a rabbi, like an active rabbi for 5 years. I was kind of an assistant rabbi in Manhattan before I moved to Indy. So that would be 10 years. And then my dad's been at this for 45 years. I think, I don't know the hard stats, but of all the people that approached us expressing interest in converting, I would have to say under 2 or under 3% go through with a conversion. Like it's tiny. Like once it becomes clear, A, that you could be totally kosher in the eyes of God without converting, and B, just how difficult it is to convert, those two factors makes it that 97 or 98% of the people that approach us do not convert. And that's totally fine as long as they're leading a happy, fulfilling lives and making the world a better place, like I said.
Does that have anything to do with, because Judaism's a very, very old religion? Does that have anything to do with, and forgive me if this comes across the wrong way, but what's the word I'm looking for? Judaism is it's such an ancient religion. I don't want to say tribal. What would I think regional. It's more of a regional faith, like that belongs to a group of people, or
Maybe if you would rewind 3,000 years, you get that sense where it's very regional. In other
hmm
words, when the
I mean,
Torah
obviously not anymore because the diaspora is huge.
exactly,
I'm talking about the origin of it.
but the
Yeah.
diaspora started, probably even before the destruction of the second temple, but for sure by then. So we're talking 2,000 years. So
hmm
it's very hard to say. In other words, I have people that I consider completely Jewish that are from, Africa
hmm
or
hmm
Syria or Iraq, or my family's from Eastern Europe, and then we have Jews from Western Europe, and there's all over the world. So it's so faith based.
Yeah.
It's so like thought based, opinion based, how you act based, that I don't even associate it so much with regions or tribes in the normative sense. People use
Right. I should
tribe.
have. Yeah, I
People.
should have
No,
clarified my statement.
I'm
Yeah.
not offended by what you asked at all. I'm just
Oh no,
answering.
I'm a
Yeah, yeah.
stickler for accuracy. I should have referring to the beginnings
hmm
of it all.
I think it's just that, I don't think that's the reason why we're slow to accept converts. There's probably a number of reasons, depending on which era in history. At some eras in histories, a lot of people were converting for the wrong reasons. So there's that.
Wait,
Like even
people.
nowadays, I'll meet someone and say like all Jews are rich, so I want to convert.
Oh, that
That's
I was gonna say. Wait, there are periods in history where people were like there were like mass people trying to convert to Judaism.
definitely like I can't fill in there for sure were mass conversions at different parts of history, but I guess it just comes with like perception. Like if the Jews are
hmm
perceived as like cool or powerful or rich or whatever, that would be a motivation to convert for the wrong reason. So they're trying to preclude those things. But I think it's actually much deeper than a technical historical reason. I think it's just that Judaism thoroughly believes that Judaism makes sense for a Jew, but it just doesn't, it's just not needed. It's just not needed for someone that's not Jewish. In other words, if we felt that you were lacking at all spiritually or ethically without being Jewish, then we would say, yeah, you have to convert in order to make it. But we don't feel that way. So
hmm
at that point, it's just why. You could be, completely whole. You could be completely one with God and be fulfilling your destiny and your mission on earth without doing it. So then it just comes down to like, this isn't needed.
Gotcha. So that does lead me into another question that I had though, because this is something that very much preoccupies the Christian faith. What happens when we die? So in the Jewish ethic that you're talking about, you're saying you can be 100% whole spiritually and not be, religiously Jewish. So in terms of the afterlife and or I put and or hell on my sort of outline here of questions to ask. I mean, does Judaism have an afterlife or a concept of a hell or both?
The answer is yes, but um, not how you see it in Hollywood. Let's put it that way. In other words, if
Gotcha.
you could describe it with any corporeal expression, if there's any physical description to hell or heaven, then you know that that's not the Jewish hell or heaven, right? It's a completely spiritual thing that we wouldn't be able to fathom. But I just wanted to go back for a second. When I was talking about
Sure.
like spiritually good with God, that wasn't for the afterlife. In other words, a very central facet of Jewish belief is that everything that you do in this world is for this world. Like I said, the
Mm.
purpose of creation was to elevate the world, not to enjoy lollipops in heaven or in lightning in hell or whatever else. Even though we don't believe in lollipops or lightning, like I said, those are physical descriptions. But the motivation for doing good is because it's good. And the motivation to not do bad is because bad is bad. So whether we believe in an afterlife or not is not is considered pathetic. Would it work as motivation? Maybe, probably, but it's considered pathetic Jewishly if you fixate on the reward and punishment generally, but especially reward and punishment in the afterlife.
Okay, this is taking a turn a little bit, so it's just very interesting that you say that because personally, and I see I didn't know this about I knew, or at least I had read that Judaism doesn't really have a concept of the afterlife insofar as like the Christian understanding of it would be. Which I mean, that's how I was raised, so obviously I have a base in that. Many years ago, on sort of my spiritual, I guess you could call it a spiritual journey, still not done yet, but I came to a point where I really became less interested in whether or not God existed or didn't exist, insofar as like as far as ethics are concerned, it's, at least for me, it's very much irrelevant because it's just like you said, doing good is good for the sake of doing good. And any other external motivation kind of, at least in my mind, clouds the ethical integrity of doing good because it's like if you're doing good works, but you're doing it for some sort of reward, at least to me, I mean, it's great, good deeds are good deeds, but
Right.
motivations can kind of blur that a little bit. So it's
Right.
very interesting that,
Right.
because you said basically almost word for word what I believe about, you know, behaving ethically as a human being. And I find that very interesting considering.
I guess where God comes into that equation for me is that it's just the ultimate, like, absolutist anchor. In other words,
Mhm.
defining the good and defining the evil. And that's, and I guess for like between an ethical atheist and an ethical monotheist, there's probably like 99% of agreement, mostly on what's considered ethical. It's just for that 1% of like, okay, what is good and what is bad? For me, that's where God that comes in. It's like the definition of which good to pursue and which evil to refrain from. You made so many points that I wanted to
I
get
know,
back to, but I can't even recall. So yeah, I guess we'll just keep it
I know,
moving.
and I apologize. That's sort of my curse.
No, no, no. It's just the nature of a conversation. There's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's why I don't put a time limit on this because if we want to go, we can go for as long as we want or need to. But
Hmm.
I found that so interesting because that speaks to me on a personal level. That sort of not necessarily ethical, but ethical motivation, I suppose, speaks to me very much. But to go back to some more of the questions I had, we've already mentioned Chabad a couple of times. And first of all, should there be phlegm in there, or is it just Chabad, or is it Chabad?
You're not even joking with that question, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm
Oh
not at
my
all.
gosh, that is an amazing question. Oh my God. You don't need phlegm either way. Oh my gosh. And my co-host is gonna absolutely love that
Do
question.
I get bonus points for phlegm though?
The phlegmometer. Did the
Yeah.
phlegmometer go off? Did you raise it on the phlegmometer?
So fun fact, I don't know why. Sometimes I'll just pronounce a word and I can't stop the phlegm. So like if it was supposed to be pronounced Chabad, not Chabad, I would actually have to consciously think about not putting the phlegm in that word for some reason. So that's why I ask.
No, it doesn't matter either way. Chabad, I guess. I don't know. Did I have phlegm there? I'm not sure.
A
Uh,
little bit.
Chabad is a sect of Hasidism. So I guess take it all the way back. You'll cut me off if this gets dull. But pretty much around 350 years ago, Judaism, especially in Europe, was growing in the view of many, dry and elitist and academic and very much like book smart. And then comes along a great rabbi known as the Baal Shem Tov, who founded Hasidism. And he didn't innovate anything new, but he re-emphasized certain portions of Judaism that he felt were neglected. So, for example, the good deeds of a simple Jew, right? So most Jews at the time were illiterate, or many were, definitely were not learned. So in the elitist scheme, the unlearned Jews were kind of low, societally. So he reemphasized the fact that if someone does good deeds, they should be respected and celebrated and all those things. He emphasized joy, which was obviously there's like biblical sources for the importance of joy, and there's so many things about it. But he felt like just people weren't joyous. He was very into melodies. He taught a very deep level of divine providence, which is a conversation for itself, but like a really all-encompassing divine providence. He taught, which he felt was consistent with the Jewish theology, and a few other things. And this is in Eastern Europe, and it really caught fire, and especially among simple people or people that were seeking a little bit more like spiritual zest to their Judaism instead of just rote studying the text or rote fulfilling the deeds. They wanted to know the why. They wanted to get deeper into it. They wanted to feel some spirituality in it. So that was the founder of Hasidism. He was the Baal Shem Tov, and he was kind of like the great great grandfather of all of Hasidism. You'll see Hasidic Jews all over the world, but pretty much anywhere that there's a high concentration of Jews, there'll be a Hasidic community or multiple Hasidic communities. But since then, there are many, many branches of Hasidism. And one of those branches that go all the way back 300 years ago is the branch of Chabad. And Chabad emphasizes, Chabad is actually an acronym for the three Kabbalistic levels of your intellect, right? So the highest level of your intellect is wisdom, then understanding, and then knowledge, or in Hebrew, Chachma, Bina, and Das. And thousands of pages of Jewish theology, philosophy, mysticism are discussing which levels are what and how they interact with one another. It's all very interesting. But at face value, the point is, Chabad introduced this intellectualizing Hasidism. So for a lot of people, Hasidism was just a lot of dancing, a lot of feeling, fervent prayer, community, like all those good things. Chabad said, yes, but let's understand all of that as deeply as we can and don't just keep it in the realm of mantras. So mantras could be super powerful for the people that like mantras and want to live their life by them. But Chabad says, yes, we believe in these mantras to be absolute truths, but let's pursue them in the realm of intellect as thoroughly as we would, let's say, any other field.
I love that. Self-professed nerd here, so I like anything I can dig deep into, which by the way, you'll never dull me. You're talking to a guy who watched a 6-hour documentary about the history of the national parks. So you're not going to dull me. I love history. I love especially obscure history that is like, first of all, most people don't even know this happened, and if they do, they just don't know that much about it. So that's incredible. I love that.
Yeah,
Learning
there
all
are so
about
many
that.
books I could recommend, and this is all just hardly even in a nutshell.
I
There's
was going to
obviously
say this is going to be a
so much to
very
talk
surface
about.
level. This is going to be a
Yeah.
very surface level conversation. So if you guys like it, let me know, and we can ask Rabbi Dovid back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Love
you
it.
said you
Love
weren't
it.
bored. I didn't think you were getting bored, but I was worried about my heart went out to your audience. That's where I'm not so certain about.
Well, the wonderful thing about the internet, which is the greatest and the worst thing about it, is if they want to, they can click away. We don't we don't
Truth.
hide we don't hide our motivations on this podcast. So anybody who's watching, they know what they're in for, and that's what all the subscribers know. And we're growing, so apparently they like it. So
Good. Good.
coming on. So, but that leads. So, like you mentioned, not, oh yeah, Hasidic. That's
Yeah,
what you were talking
Hasidic.
about. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Hasidic. So I've also heard Ashkenazi. What are some of the differences there? Is it a geographical thing or
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, Hasidism is generally an ideology, and
okay?
Ashkenazi is geographic. For for the first 300 years, roughly, or maybe 250 years of Hasidism, everyone that was Hasidic happened to have been Ashkenazic. They were all living in Europe. European Jewry, generally speaking, unless you're talking about like South Eastern Europe, but generally speaking, European Jewry is known as Ashkenazi Jewry, right?
Gotcha.
So all Hasidim were living in Europe at the time. But in truth, it's an ideology. So since then, since many Jews have moved to Israel or America, which both have been melting pots for us, even Jewishly, many non-Ashkenazi Jews from North Africa or the Middle East or other parts of the world, have become Hasidic. So they adopted,
Gotcha.
which was typically in Europe, but theoretically it's an ideology, and an ideology doesn't know borders. And they kind of said like, oh, I kind of like, this Hasidic discourse that discusses this super deep concept. I'm gonna maybe live my life by these customs. So many non-Ashkenazic Jews later, in the last, let's say, 60 years, 70 years, became Hasidic.
Okay, very interesting. But speaking of, that sort of historical culture, I've seen a couple when I was reading some of the information about you just to get an idea of, who you were, so it wasn't a completely blind interview. I saw the word Yiddishkeit come up a couple of times. Can you explain to me what that is?
Yiddishkeit, in most usages of the word, is just Judaism in Yiddish. I mean, Yiddish is a language, and the word for Judaism is Yiddishkeit. There are few people today that translate Yiddishkeit differently than that.
Hmm.
For them, it's like Yiddishist culture, which has had to do with like socialism. There was like a lot of vehement socialist, anti-religious Jews in the old country. They pretty much assimilated completely. So like their offspring in 95+% of the cases are no longer Jewish. So their usages of the word Yiddishkeit it just aren't used anymore. So
Mm,
Yiddishkeit to mean Judaism is in most cases what people mean nowadays when they use the word Yiddishkeit.
yeah, and I'm given to understand because you brought up Yiddish being a language. I'm given to understand that etymologically its origins are a mixture of like Hebrew and Old German.
I'd say mostly Old German. I think there's
Yeah.
other Slavic languages mixed in as well,
Mm-hmm.
and then some Hebrew. I'm reading I finished a book of the history of Jews in Germany, and apparently, it's difficult. Apparently, it's not just Old German. According to the old Germans, they claim that we're just mispronouncing stuff. But then, if you do that long enough, it becomes a thing, and then it's just a new
Right.
religion. Yeah, and that's what happened.
Yeah, that's essentially how a new language is made. You just mispronounce things long enough.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, that's illuminating, very illuminating. So a word that a lot of, non-Jewish people might have heard, but probably have no idea what it means is mitzvah, probably in the context of a bar or bat mitzvah.
Mm.
Um, what is a mitzvah?
So popularly, a mitzvah, whenever someone uses it popularly, they mean a good deed. A mitzvah is a good deed. When a boy turns 13 or when a girl turns 12, Jewishly, they become adults enough to be responsible for their own actions. So a bar
Mm.
mitzvah or a bat mitzvah means now you're responsible to do the mitzvahs yourself, do good deeds and don't do bad
Oh.
deeds. That's what it means, bar and bat mitzvah, literally. But the word mitzvah itself comes from the Hebrew word tzivoy, which means commandment, which
Mm.
actually goes back to what we were saying before of like your definition of what's a good deed if you're a Jewish person stems from what God commands you.
Gotcha.
Um,
So what are some examples of I know it seems kind of obvious, but like what would you say is like a good example of a mitzvah that you see quite commonly as a rabbi?
okay, so there's two categories of mitzvahs. There's mitzvahs between man, and there are mitzvahs between man and God. So the mitzvahs between man and man are pretty easy. Help an old lady cross the street, call your grandmother, give charity, volunteer in a soup kitchen, help people that are destitute, give people that are in need of a job, even if they're not so good at it, and on and on and on. Host guests. Those are mitzvahs between man and man. And then there are mitzvahs between man and God. Some of those mitzvahs are applicable even if you're a Gentile, like prayer. Like prayer is a mitzvah between man and God, obviously, and that would be when you're in need to call out to God would be a mitzvah. That would be a good deed. Then there are mitzvahs. Most mitzvahs between man and God are unique to Jews that are practicing Judaism. So, for example, a woman lighting Shabbat candles, right? Before Shabbat, before the sun sets, before you can't do any work, the last creation that a woman will create before the sun sets is lighting candles in her home, usually over the Shabbat dinner table, right? That would be a mitzvah between man and God, or like celebrating Jewish holidays, right? Eating matzah on Passover. That'd be a mitzvah between man and God. And those are those categories. So generally speaking, one way of categorizing the mitzvahs are mitzvahs between good deeds between man and man and God. Another way of categorizing mitzvahs, if you're curious, is that the mitzvahs that we understand completely, let's say like giving charity or thou
Okay.
shalt not kill. There's negative mitzvahs too, right? Thou shall is a positive mitzvah and thou shalt not is a negative mitzvah. So a negative mitzvah is thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, etc. Then there are mitzvahs that we would not have come up with on our own had we been making our own religion. But once God commands us, they kind of make sense. So let's say, for
Yeah.
example, commemorating the holidays, right? So like we celebrate Passover because the Jews left Egypt, right? If I was starting totally from scratch, I wouldn't have Passover because there would be nothing to commemorate. But once you explain to me what I'm commemorating, I'll be like, oh, that makes sense. So that's the middle category. And then the third category are the mitzvahs that don't make any sense. So a mitzvah that doesn't make any sense, but we just know that God wants us to fulfill it, even though we don't understand it, would be the laws of kosher, right?
I was just
Not
gonna say that sounds like keeping kosher to a certain
yeah.
extent.
So there aren't many examples of laws that we don't understand whatsoever that fall into this category of chukim, which means irrational mitzvahs. But like the laws of kosher, like I could eat kosher milk, I could drink kosher milk, and then on a separate occasion eat kosher meat, and they're both fine. But for some reason, when I put the milk and meat together, that's problematic. I mean, that's just irrational. But nevertheless, for whatever reason, and no human has fathomed it, God doesn't want a Jew to do that, so we don't do it.
Fair enough. But the justification is there, so
Right. And
I
the
totally get it.
justification is like if the justification to do it has to start earlier. If you're
Yeah.
fulfilling what's known as a chok, an irrational mitzvah, you have to A, know that God exists, B, know that God cares, C, know that God expressed what he cares about in the Torah, and then D, try to adhere to the Torah. Once you open that Torah book, you'll find, oh, wait a second, there are certain mitzvahs that I don't understand, but because I had those first four levels, I'm willing to adhere to them even though I don't completely understand the depth.
So in the event that someone were to either intentionally or unintentionally not keep kosher, what I hate to use the word penalty, but for lack of a better word, like what happens if someone, makes a mistake or intentionally doesn't keep kosher or doesn't
Right. So
adhere?
as far as like societally, nothing.
Hmm.
Maybe in the days 2000 years ago when there was a Jewish high court and there were witnesses testifying that someone ate not kosher and they were seeking to rebel, but that hasn't happened for 2000 years. So societally, nothing happens if someone doesn't eat kosher. Do we believe in like divine karma? Yes, like I said before, we do believe in reward and punishment. Again, we consider it pathetic for your motivation to be reward and punishment, but Jews do believe in reward and punishment. It just shouldn't be the why of you doing something. But I'd say the deepest thing or the worst thing that happens when somebody doesn't fulfill the mitzvahs is that they kind of harm their relationship to God. In other words, they don't have the deepest connection. Right. That's really, if anyone has a spiritual inclination in their adherence to Judaism, that's really the motivation of all of this. In other words, you're trying to perfect your relationship to God and to with the fellow man. Right. So the mitzvahs between man and man, you're looking to perfect that relationship. And the mitzvahs between man and God, you're looking to perfect your relationship with God. Right. Sometimes the metaphor of a rope is given where you have like a whole bunch of strands comprising this rope. And yeah, the rope's not going to be completely split if you cut one strand, but ideally you want to keep that rope as intact as possible, and maybe for the strands that were previously cut, you may want to start retying them and perfecting your rope again. But that's the metaphor given, and it's just simply like you're looking to experience spirituality in a real pure way. And that's the motivation in the first place. So like nothing will happen to you. There's no slaps on the wrist. Lightning doesn't come from heaven. None of that stuff.
Stevie Wicks is setting out to give you the greatest candle you've ever smelled, and they're specializing in hand-poured, all-natural soy wax candles. Many, many varieties, very many scents. These things are so good, and each Stevie Wicks candle comes with a scent-boosting tart right in the center, so you get a boost of scent as soon as you start burning your candle. What's really unique about Stevie Wicks, though, is not only can you get individual candles from them, but you can also sign up for their monthly subscription box. Once you subscribe, you'll receive a box every month full of candles and candle-related items, such as their 3-wick candle, single-wick candles, soy wax tarts, and also with every box you'll get a free gift. This could be anything from another candle-related item, semi-precious stone jewelry, could be any number of things, including exclusive candles not available anywhere else. And if you are a Stevie Wicks subscriber, every month where there is a major holiday, you will get holiday-themed candles. So if you want to get the best candles you've ever had today, go on to steviewicks.com and place your order there, or sign up for your monthly subscription box. And as a special deal for Arete viewers, use promo code Arete at checkout to receive 10% off your entire order. Or if you'd like to sign up for a monthly subscription box, use promo code Arete20 and you'll get 20% off your first month's box.
It's so funny because, like, again, I've had Jewish friends and acquaintances over the years, so like I have what I would characterize as like like a tertiary knowledge of Judaism, but by no means fully
But Jay, can I
understand.
just jump in for a sec? Like most Jews don't know Judaism, to be
Oh, good.
blunt.
So I'm I should
In other
feel
words,
bad.
just proximity to them. If they themselves don't know it, then how are they supposed to, teach that to you? Not to mention, you guys are probably just like in the same fantasy football league. It wasn't like a theological relationship in most cases. But even if
Yeah.
it is a theological or deeper relationship, if the person themselves aren't educated on like this type of stuff, then how are they supposed to impart that on someone else? And that's kind of my job. So much of a rabbi means teacher. That's what a rabbi
Hmm.
means. It means a teacher. And so much of what I do is just to teach. Everything I'm saying to you tonight is not obvious to most Jews. They need to study this stuff just like you're learning it for the first time.
It's always sort of entertaining to me how, again, I wouldn't go so far as to call myself a Christian, even though but I was raised Christian, so that's the theological base which I started and which I know the best because a lot of people don't know this about me. When I was younger, I was on path to become a pastor. I was raised Lutheran Protestant. So I surprised a lot of people. I know my Bible pretty well, but I'm always fascinated by how, in many ways, Judaism seems very, very similar, and then in other ways, just completely different. And that's one of the key ways is like Christianity, at least in all the sects that I've come across, all the denominations that I've come across, there's some more than others, but there's always this sort of idea of, like you said, punishment or guilt to some level. One of the things that really bothers me about a lot of Christians, so I'm not going to single anybody out, obviously, but like there does seem to be an air of superiority at times where it's like, and you have to constantly remind them that in the New Testament, the iconic line in the New Testament is they're about to stone a woman for adultery, and Jesus says, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And that's often forgotten in Christianity because that's kind of the whole crux, pun not intended, but hey,
Hmm.
that's the whole crux of the faith is that, at least as far as the Christian ethic is concerned, is that we're all sinners, and to judge one another in that frame is like not only wrong, but it's kind of dumb because everybody's a sinner. Every human being is a sinner. So it's interesting, and I'm happy to hear it, that Judaism doesn't have that level of sort of
It,
judgment.
it it's wrong, like I said before, and maybe even, in Christian faith it's wrong as well. But I think even on a more surface level, it's tactically so
Hmm.
dumb.
Really, yeah.
What's your goal? Like, what is the goal? Is your
The
goal
goal,
that
generally speaking, is probably to make someone feel better about themselves, but it's a really weak way to do so. And that's just my opinion, but
right? But they'll
that's
never admit that that's their goal.
never,
They want to
never.
change the world, right? But changing the world will not happen if you're just mean.
Well, one of the greatest thinkers, I don't know if you're familiar with Jordan Peterson, but one of my personal favorite thinkers is his whole philosophy, well, not his whole philosophy, I'm sorry, but a good introductory philosophy he has is the virtue of cleaning your room. And that's both literal and metaphorical because it's like if you want to turn your life around, great place to start is to just clean your room. But
Hmm.
then that also goes to, you can't go out and change the world if your house is in disarray. So it starts in your immediate sphere. Your immediate sphere of influence is the place that you sleep.
There's a famous rabbi, I don't remember which, I have to look it up, but I always quote him. He said on his deathbed that when he was a young man, he wanted to change the world. And then when he got a little older, he became more realistic and said, you know what, just my country. And then as he grew a little older, just my city. And he went down to his town and his neighborhood. And then toward the end of his life, he's like, you know what, just my family. And then as he's lying there on my deathbed, he said, I should have started with myself, and then I would have inspired my family. My family would have made ripple effects in my neighborhood and then to the town, city, country, world. So
But
you
isn't
just have to
that,
go about it the
yeah,
other way. Yeah.
that's how it goes though. I mean, I've literally seen it happen with more than a few people where it's like once somebody turns their life around or really does something great in their own sphere of influence, they take care of the people that are around them. It does have a ripple effect. It does.
It's
I've
just
seen
that
it.
with social media, it became even harder to like appreciate the small things
Hmm.
because you just see so many global personalities. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you're a podcast host and you probably want to make the world a better place in some way through it. And then you just like compare yourself to Joe Rogan and you're like, oh shit. That's
Well,
not
to be
happening.
fair, I'm not
Yeah.
nearly as cool as Joe Rogan, and I know that's not going to happen. So my avenue's
I
a
would
bit
I would
different.
venture to say you're probably cooler, in my opinion, my humble
Oh,
opinion.
I don't know. I don't know. That would be wild for me to even not even in a podcast setting, just to be able to meet and talk to that guy for 5, 10 minutes. I like the way
Really?
his mind. I like the way his mind works. I like how inquisitive and curious he is, or at least having never met him, but having listened to him talk to a lot of different people, I appreciate that about him. But that actually is a perfect segue to my next question. Tell me about the Indiana Mensch Club.
Okay, so the Indiana Men's Club is a something we just started. I'm actually wearing the shirt, represent.
There we go.
Thanks to my friend Donick for printing that. It's just a Jewish men's club. We started the Young Jewish Professionals of Indianapolis when he moved down to Indianapolis, and it's pretty much for young Jews between the ages of 21 and 40 or 45. And it's been great. Really growing, started from scratch. Now we have a lot of people involved, thank God. I wanted to mess around with a different dynamic where we were encouraging just like healthy male relationships, maybe of all ages. So those two dynamics where it's just males and all ages. And it's kind of like just like a vintage parlor society where we'll take a different subject each time, and I'll prepare like different tidbits of food for thought for people, and we'll just discuss them after a couple of beers, fewer inhibitions, and we're all, it's after like 45 minutes of conversation. It's all very warm and open, and we only had one so far. We have another one scheduled, but it materialized to something better than I even hoped for. Like the warmth was attained at this first gathering really early, and it was just all around good. The only downside of the first one was that the age ranges were still pretty much limited to the young Jewish professional group that I had. We had like a couple of people that would, maybe like 3 or 4 that were older than the young Jewish professionals, but we'll work on that. I feel like for whatever reason, older people generally are more down.
Really? Okay.
They're just more down for getting together.
Yeah.
They're less busy, but I think they're just also, they think less before like agreeing to do a thing. Do you feel that?
Yeah, it was funny because I sort of misunderstood initially, like in at least in my experience in my circle, you know, people that are older tend to not be so inclined to have sort of an in-depth conversation, especially if it requires some really deep thought or even disagreement. Like my mother's, bless her heart, but she does not like conflict at all, and she often misconstrues a spirited debate as an argument. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, no, they're not the same thing. Because at
Right.
the end, one thing I pride myself on just as an individual is I can have an extremely heated debate, and at the end of it, we're still friends. You know, we disagree vehement. Like I mentioned Justin earlier, Justin and I are so politically misaligned. It's a joke with us, but we can have just hardcore political discussions that last hours. And at the end of it, we were like, "This is a really good conversation." And generally speaking, we come away at least maybe not necessarily agreeing, but we can see how the other person arrived at their point of view. So it's
Yeah. We could tag this in the show notes or whatever, but I posted a month or so ago a story from the Talmud where a guy, long story what the Talmud is, but pretty much a compendium of Jewish analysis on Jewish law. And he had a bar plukta, which is Aramaic for the guy that he always disagreed with. All right, he's a bar plukta, and they disagreed about everything. I think that you couldn't go 5 pages in the Talmud without seeing a disagreement between them. And when one of them died, the other one's students tried to console him. So whenever the surviving one made a point, his students and his friends would bring proofs for his point. They would say, "Oh, you're so right, you're so right." And he said, "That's the exact opposite of what I'm looking for in a study partner." My former bar plukta, the guy that I would always argue with, each time I made a point, he gave me 24 reasons why I was wrong. 24. And that's what I'm looking for in a study partner, because they sharpen our ideas. They force us to either be right or to go home. So that with the point you're making is definitely very much a Jewish value.
Yeah, and just to your point about, because you said it perfectly, it forces you to either be right or, reevaluate. But one of the worst parts about, sometimes I'll watch a debate and you can tell somebody may in fact be right. They just don't have the skills to articulate their point of view or
Sophistry.
catch. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So debate is just practice and a workout exercise for your ideas. And when somebody creams you or brings up a very good point, you're like, I need to reevaluate this. I need to really think long and hard about my point of view. Why do I have this point of view? Do I actually believe it, or have I been told to believe this? What really draws me to this point? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to do the work, but for some reason I really enjoy thinking. So it's my
You should
curse.
know it's not so easy. Like, even though I preach that, respectful argument is great and it's actually
It's
critical for
hard.
society, you have this close friend. I'm assuming you guys have a deep relationship, and there's like, I'm not going to say there's wedlock, between you two, but it's like friend lock or whatever the term you want to use.
Definite
But if
friend
you're
lock.
just a guy on the street or someone that you kind of know peripherally, it's not easy to engage in a spirited conversation and then also not take it personally.
Yeah, not trying to toot my own horn, but even today, because again, we do a lot of podcasts, and one of them is it's not solely political, but it's basically topical current events. So our comment section is usually people calling me stupid or that and the other. And I've kind of made it a little game for myself is how nice can I be to this person in the comment section? And lo and behold, the comment thread started yesterday with this person, I'm not even going to say, but calling me not very flattering names. And by the end of it, we're speaking two languages to each other and, being like, hey, we agree to disagree. Hope you have an amazing day. And
It's
that's where
so
it ended.
I try to do comment section is actually easier for me because I have the time to reflect on
Hmm.
what I'm writing
I
and you could
agree.
edit and then erase. Whereas in person it's much more reactionary. But I try to do exactly that in the comment section. It's almost disarming when somebody is like super
I love it.
flagrantly rude and you just like answer their qualms and also respect them and like almost like praise their position even though you disagree or whatever. It's cool how that works and like you kind
Yeah.
of you win in another sense of the word.
Yeah.
Like you just
And
win the tone.
yeah. Yeah. And I'll admit, I'll throw in some sort of friendly jabs. Never, I have a very strict rule about not name calling unless it's a referential joke, but then it's not to insult. It's meant to elicit a laugh. So
Mm.
I have a hard and fast rule about no name calling. But for example, in this particular comment thread, um, he said at one point because he kept using punctuation in weird places. So I assumed that English wasn't his first language. But one thing he said was, do you not know the English very well? So I responded in like the sentence structure of Yoda, and then immediately switched to like Elizabethan English. But then immediately after that, kind of having a little fun, I said, you know, based upon that, I'm assuming in a completely non-insulting way that English is not your first language. If like, am I right? What is your first language? And then turns out Quebec French is his mother tongue, as it were.
Mm.
So that was fun. I
Do you
liked
speak
walking
Quebec
away from that.
French?
Oh man, years ago I was actually fluent in like Parisian French, but
Hmm.
I have so forgotten. I'm a bit of a language nerd, which I was going to ask this question later, but it's appropriate now. Any tips for learning Hebrew, specifically the alphabet?
Um, yeah, I mean, so many, but I guess broadly, no, I mean, just put in the work, but you already know that.
Yeah,
Languages are so difficult to pick up and there's no silver bullets.
yeah,
There's like different like memory games for particular letters that are confusing with other letters that I help like my students in Hebrew school with. But that's like the specifics. So if you're not into the specifics, broadly speaking, I just noticed when you just put your head down, that's the only way. But I've never learned a new language. Like I know three languages, but I haven't done any learning of new languages since I was a kid. So I can't really speak on the subject, but it's probably like any other. Yeah, just put your head down and get to work.
yeah. Well, I thought it would be cute because I use Duolingo. Duolingo is amazing. The problem with Duolingo, though, is if you're learning a language that doesn't use the Latin alphabet, it uses the language's alphabet. So I was like, hey, I really want to learn at least a little bit of Hebrew, just because a lot of newsreels, if they're interviewing people in Israel, some people speak Hebrew, and
Hmm.
I'd like to know what they were saying and not take people's word for it. That's a big thing because I really want to learn Hebrew and Arabic for both those reasons, but they both have different alphabets. So in Duolingo, though, you can learn the alphabet, but I was just like, before I can actually get into this, I need to learn the alphabet. And it's such a different animal than what I'm used
Hmm.
to. But
Totally.
yeah, I think I'm just gonna have to study hard. Um, but the next question I had for you is, can you explain the yarmulke
Yeah.
to the
So
people out there?
I wear a yarmulke somewhere under this headset. There it is.
Yep.
Um, a yarmulke is a head covering that observant Jewish men wear. It's a reminder that no matter how high you reach, there's always going to be something above you. That something symbolizes God. It's so in other words, it's like a humility thing, and it reminds you that at any given time, you have the expectation to make the situation you're in as godly and as spiritual and as good as possible.
Are there a lot of sort of practices in Judaism that sort of serve that purpose of like just reminding you about um, God, your role in all that?
I mean, I wear tzitzit. This is like similar.
Okay.
A lot of like uh, different details which would indicate that you always have the obligation to fulfill as many good deeds as you can. Yeah. For me, it's almost like a uniform. I don't know if anyone could fathom it, but maybe like just as a thought experiment, again, no proselytizing in Judaism, but just for the sake of science, throw on a yarmulke tomorrow and just walk around for a day. And it'll just be interesting to you. I'm curious because I've grown up with a yarmulke my whole life. I don't know what it's like to be anonymous.
I think there might be a video. I don't know if me putting on a yarmulke would be offensive. Um, that could be a very interesting video idea because as long as it's not offensive,
Oh my gosh, yeah, you get the green light is granted. Yeah.
I think that'd be an interesting video to do
I
is
mean,
have
I don't
somebody
think
like me.
because you wouldn't even like. I think maybe because you've never worn a yarmulke for a day, and then you'll go from that 0 to 1. You'll notice like maybe a slightly more eyes upon you.
Hmm.
But like, I don't. Indiana's been great. Like, there's no anti-Semitism. People don't react to me being openly Jewish with any
Yeah,
bad stuff.
yeah.
If anyone's reacting to my Jewishness, it's just positive.
Yeah, Indiana is an oddly, well, I shouldn't say oddly, surprisingly multicultural place.
I don't think it's that. I think it's just people truly respect. In other words, if you would rewind to 1985 Indiana, or 1990 before it became so multicultural, I think you'd still get the same result. Like my dad moved here in 1980. It wasn't the new multiculturalism that taught people how to be kind. I think it's just like good heartland Midwestern values that propel just a certain kindliness, or at the very least, like a live and let live attitude.
hmm Yeah, well, again, should have stated my point clearly because, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But I think the multiculturalism, because I've seen it grow to a certain extent. And
For sure.
I think it's because, this area it's just like you said, at the very least, there's a live and let live aspect. But generally speaking, I haven't come across very many rude people here.
Absolutely not. I mean, that's
It just doesn't happen that often.
Jewish education in Indianapolis is pretty weak. So starting from fifth grade, I was in Chicago for school, and I was all over the world. Traveled a lot, did a lot of traveling, but also in schooling in different countries and all that. Indiana's sales point, like I should tell Governor Holcomb, like if you want people to move here, this is what makes us different, is that our people are the nicest. I don't think it's probably not too different from like any other non-Chicago city in the Midwest. It probably isn't, but that sense of just genuinely good people, kind people, conversational people,
Hmm.
open people. Um, I think there's just a bad rap, terrible rap for, red states in big
Very
cities.
much. Yeah.
Complete misunderstanding in my experience. Like any anti-Semitism that I faced in my life was only in large blue cities. Like Indiana's just been fantastic to me and my family.
Well, and that's kind of I'm not going to say it's the dirty little secret, but that's kind of the thing that nobody really talks about when it comes to anti-Semitism because we were talking a little bit about, October 7th before we started really the podcast proper. And as a non-Jewish person and somebody who really doesn't I don't have a direct dog in this fight other than just being a decent human being. Like
Mm.
I was amazed at the open anti-Semitism from places that purport to be bastions of tolerance, and I could not believe my eyes. And I can only imagine what that was like for the Jewish community. Like I was in shock.
Yeah, it was crazy, and the fact that, to be blunt, like Arabs have passions about the conflict in Israel. That makes sense, and that was difficult to deal with as a Jewish community, obviously, but it wasn't surprising. I think for many Jews, they had placed so much hope historically over the last 100 years in the university system.
Hmm.
And the Jews have just been so involved in getting the highest levels of education and professorships and board seats and all that stuff. And then for the colleges and the universities to be so openly hostile to just any expression of Jewishness, that I think was the most jarring. I'm not going to say that was the worst part of it, because again, there's a war going on, but the most surprising was just how hostile that environment, which had just been, for Jews in America, the academy, especially early on, was the great equalizer, where like an immigrant Eastern European Jew that just had a good brain and worked hard, he can make it in that setting. That's been Jewish tradition in America, like Jewish American tradition for like 100 years now or more. So that was just a shocking phenomenon.
Well, and
But again,
we're
like the Ben Shapiro's and the Jordan Petersons, again, I'm not huge listeners of them, but I'm sure they'll say, "Oh, it's been in the cards for the last 20 years."
I mean, to a point, but even so, Jordan doesn't really speak because Jordan's not Jewish. But he didn't really speak to that. But Ben, I know, I, yes and no, because he's sort of openly critical of the university system. But even I think even he was surprised at the level of just blatant. I mean, I'll put it to you this way. If the people doing that had been wearing MAGA hats, for example, the entire establishment would have been rightfully calling out anti-Semitism, but because their side was the ones doing it, they just the mental gymnastics of justification and calling it anything but anti-Semitism.
If they were wearing MAGA hats and did 1/20th of
True,
what the
that's
people
fair.
on campus were doing, it would still be like
They'd be in jail.
January 6th levels of media coverage.
Yeah,
No doubt.
and that's not a partisan statement. That I mean, sorry, not sorry. That's a statement of fact. I mean, there's
Yeah,
precedent for that.
take Jews aside, even if it had nothing to do with Jews. If people on
Yeah,
MAGA hats camped on a campus, blocking entry to different buildings for a day, for one day, not to mention it went on for months, but for one day, it would be a news story for a very, very long time.
they'd still be talking about it. They'd be
Yeah.
talking about it in 2028.
Greetings, boys and girls. My name is Isaiah Vargas. For over 3 decades, R.L. Stine's Goosebumps has reigned as one of the best-selling book series in history, spawning a monster franchise that's lasted since 1992 and spawning a massive fan base. Folks who love to talk about this influential series, and that's where we come in. Join the Goosebumps crew, Nick Shaw, Bjorn Panelik, and myself every week as we dive into the world of Goosebumps and talk about everything from the books, TV shows, movies, video games, merchandise, and so much more. Many like-minded Goosebumps fans and a growing list of special guests join us, so if you want Goosebumps, get with the program. Tune in to the Goosebumps crew every week on YouTube and audio platforms. Become a Goosebumps crew member today. Listen with the lights on.
So as a rabbi, there's the reaction to October 7th and generally like the shocking displays on campus. It's just been a really strong reminder that Jews have never sought to be victims. Like people have been so strong and just going forward, building and teaching and developing communities and even businesses and all things that we were doing so well until now. I've just been shocked how that's been the mentality since October 7th as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I've been very impressed because, for a lot of people, the victim mentality is very tempting in 2024. And for the Jewish people, obviously there are exceptions, but on the whole, they've been very resolute in saying, we're just doing our thing. We're going to continue marching straight forward to prosperity and to strong communities and to, educating our young and raising family and all those important things.
Yeah, and I had asked you in the email, just making sure, because I had assumed you had been. You obviously have traveled to Israel because you answered that question. As someone who has never been, but honestly, one day, obviously, when things are a little bit calmer, would love to go. I mean, what's Israel like?
Frankly, I probably don't know right now because Israel as a land is, 3,000 years old or more. But as a state, the modern state of Israel is so
Hmm.
young that the last time I was there was maybe over 10 years ago. And that constitutes what, 1/7 of its entire history?
That's a very fair point.
So like an American ratio, that would be like going back in time, not to 2014. That'd be like going back to like 1997 or whatever, or more even.
So it's a total, yeah, I get that. It's a
So
totally different
like,
place.
I think they're just a lot more technology. The buildings are, just real estate's nicer. People are much more plugged into, like, generally that's true across the world of like what the trends are. Instagram just did that, what the trends are in New York City and Paris. They bleed into Tel Aviv, but also into, Novosibirsk or whatever, all over the world. So there's that. But my time in Israel was really lovely. I spent time in a yeshiva, which is like a rabbinical seminary, I guess, in Holon, which is not a touristic or well-known city, but it's a big Israeli city, and it really gave me a great sense of the city, not like the whitewashed version for tourists or
Hmm.
for visitors or for the news. Here's just a really vibrant, cool city that doesn't attract any tourists, and it just, Israelis living their life, and I really loved it. They allowed me to stay in the country even though I was an obnoxious adolescent, so I guess I'm grateful for them for that. Um, yeah, it's just an all around good time. I think I'm always shocked. I don't know. They just seem so industrious. Like, I'm always shocked about how industrious Israel is. They really got the short stick, and just being surrounded by a bunch of enemies looking to destroy them at all given times, and to develop such a vibrant economy and culture and food scene and music and not to mention happy citizens. They're just crushing it all around. And now the plurality of Jews live in Israel for the first
Hmm.
time. I think that happened like in the last 5 years, that the biggest of the entire world Jewish population, the largest country is currently Israel. They beat the
Is
Jewish
it really?
population of the USA. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I remember just having a random discussion, and somebody had asked me, they're like, where do most Jewish people live in the world? And I said, I think for a time at least it was like specifically New York City, but the United States. So really, the Jewish population in Israel has eclipsed the Jewish population in the United States.
In the
That's
United States, yes.
incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's. I mean, it seems counterintuitive, but I mean, it makes sense when you.
After this war is over, I want to just see if I could do some study. And I'm assuming one of these pop historians have already done it. But I think even if you include all the dead of the wars and terrorism in Israel, include all that stuff, the last 75 or 80 years, which was since the founding of the modern state of Israel, probably was the era in history where the least Jews were killed. If you
Mm.
include, even if you include all the wars and all the terrorism, just we've been facing so much, anti-Semitism that killed across the world. Even if you would add all of that up, it just wouldn't compare to any 80-year period from before then. I'm pretty sure
So,
that's a true statement.
so I'm making sure I understand what you're saying. So you're saying that, um, as far as you can tell, that even if you add up from the history, the lowest number of Jewish deaths has occurred within the state of Israel. Is that what you're
I
saying,
believe that to
postulating?
be. I mean, it's a theory.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just want to make sure I understood your
You
theory.
have to realize that before the modern state of Israel, before America, because America is, I would argue, the greatest, place for a Jew to be ever in history. I love this country. I'm grateful for what it did to my grandparents, my great grandparents. I'm grateful for what it does to me every day. I don't take it for granted whatsoever. But before America and before Israel, Jews were extremely spread out. So just because things were going well for, let's say, the Jews of Salonika in Greece from between the years 1700 to 1800, at that time there were still pogroms happening in, Eastern Europe, and then vice versa. When times were good in Eastern Europe between 1400 and 1600, Jews were being expelled, exiled from Spain at that time. So if you
Hmm.
would just take on the balance at any given 80-year period throughout history, I think it's an interesting theory to look at.
I I think it's probably true when you phrase it that way, and it would make sense because part of the justification. I mean, there was. I hate to say it this way because it sounds like the state of Israel needs to justify its existence. It doesn't. But one of the justifications for statehood of the nation of Israel was the fact that it's particularly after the Holocaust, it
Right.
became clear, and particularly after the United States for a time, they didn't bar immigration, but they rejected Europe, a certain number of European Jews from
Sure.
immigrating
Yeah.
from Europe to the United States. It became very clear, or I would think it became very clear that there really is no what you would consider like a completely safe place for Jewish people anywhere in the world because it was all, at the very least, dependent on the whims of whatever nation was in question. So that was a really big justification for the foundation of the state of Israel, as I understand it. So if that is true, which I agree with you, I think it probably is if you just look at the numbers. I mean, case in point, man. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the argument.
Yeah. For me, like, I don't know if that's my argument for the justification of the state of Israel. This is like a huge political
I mean,
conversation.
there's way more than that, but I mean that's
Yeah.
one of many.
No,
I
no,
mean,
in many Jews, like that would be the most heard argument from Jewish people today. It's just not mine. I think for me, it's so much more practical. I think that, so many Jews were moving to Israel and they were just legally buying land from people.
yeah, and I think
Like
that's
that's just
something that
totally
a lot
fine.
of yeah, I think that's something a lot of people don't know though is like and it's the way they talk about it. And I've only learned more about this recently, but again, history nerd, so I just read a lot of history and love good history documentaries because let's be honest, some of them are awful. But um, a lot of people don't understand the fact that I mean, there were already Jews immigrating to what was then the Mandate of Palestine and buying land legally. So this was a thing that was already happening. It was just a question of legal statehood, which
All
I
right.
mean, I'm sorry, it wasn't just a question of legal statehood, but semantically, it's not that much different from what was already happening, is what I'm getting at.
Yes. I mean, I read a letter this morning from the first Chabad Rabbi who was writing to the Jews of Israel in the late 1700s. Jews have been living there for a while, and I think if the wars weren't sparked against the Jews, they would have just continued to legally purchase land in places that they wanted to live, just like anyone else, anywhere else in the
Hmm.
world.
Hmm.
And I seriously think a strong sense of victimhood is what prompted the Arabs to attack. They said, wait a second, the Middle East is our neighborhood. We just don't want to be purchased out of our locations. But to me, buying a piece of property is fine. We do it all the time. Everyone does it all the time.
Well, especially considering the fact that you would have had to have abided by the laws in that,
Yeah,
that area. So,
sure.
it's the definition of legal. I mean,
Hmm.
no matter where you are, you're legally buying property anywhere. You're abiding by their laws, and I mean,
So like for me, obviously, like I'm a rabbi and I believe in the validity of the Torah, and I think like God gave the land to Abraham and all those things. But like my political arguments are much more mundane.
yeah,
They're
but I mean, they're no less valid. In
mhm.
some ways, they might be even a little bit more because you wouldn't be accused of making an argument from
Sure,
authority with,
sure,
that political stance.
exactly.
Um, so yeah, I'm very much in the same camp as you because I'm still stupefied at times with some of the arguments and claims people are making in regards to that. It's a wild and weird world out there. But on a happier note, um, your profile had said that one of your things that you love to do is read. What do you like to read? And if I can press you for the answer to this question, what is your favorite book ever?
Yeah, I don't have a favorite book. I guess I won't cheat and I won't answer any religious book because that's a rabbinic cop out. But when I was young and I thought of myself as more serious, I insisted on reading just nonfiction and history books because I said if I'm not studying Torah and if I'm not studying Jewish law and Jewish philosophy, then at least let it be true. And like the older I got, I'm kind of at a different place now where I think the truer books, broadly speaking, are fiction because, nonfiction is limited to the scope of the author and the subject matter and what he's including in sins of omission and commission and all those things. Whereas with fiction, if I have a different interpretation than the author, that's still fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just the truth as I see it. So I mean, I try to read smart fiction. Like I try to read the classics or, the bigger brained fiction, but I've been mostly reading those, but I'm still doing, I'd say it's like 1/3 nonfiction, 2/3 fiction for me right now.
Oh, very good. Yeah, I went through a very similar period where, again, in my younger years, wish I could talk to that kid. It was very much it's similar attitude where it's like, well, I mean, fiction is in a way a waste of time, except for the classics. But the dirty little secret is a lot of the not all of them, a lot of the classics are boring. Like just being
Right.
real. Like
Yeah.
a lot of them are really tough reads. But yeah, also I love reading so much. I wish I had more time to read more. It's a problem because life is busy
Yeah.
in
Do you
2024.
have children?
I do not.
Oh, you have
I
no
have.
excuse. You got to finish a book a week.
Fair enough. You know what? I need, yes, I need to be better about that because every time I try to give myself an excuse, I'm like, well, really? Do you? I know you do a lot of podcasts and you work 60 hours a week plus, but I mean, you've got time. You've got time. It's true. You're right. You're absolutely right.
So
That
I'm not
that
going to
can
say
be.
this is my favorite book, but to answer your question, I finished this book recently and I loved it. It's heavy and sad, but also hilarious and beautiful. It's from Cynthia Ozick. It's called The Shawl, and it's super short, so one of those like really approachable books. It's about a Holocaust survivor. The first scene is just her witnessing the murder of her baby that she had been hiding for a long time in the death camps. She survives and then goes to live like a way less poetic life in New York and then South Florida. And like, I don't know if your audience will love it as much because it like laughs at a bunch of like the stereotypical Jewish retiree stuff. And it's all just like very I love books that remind me how pathetic I and humans are. Like that's my favorite type of book. Like if I look at Dostoevsky, like it just shows like anything that emphasizes human shortcomings, that's the type of
Mhm.
fiction I like reading. If I'm looking for what humans can accomplish, I go to my Jewish books. But if I'm looking for how pathetic we are left to our own devices, or if we neglect, self-perfection and all those things, like trying to be a better person, if we neglect that stuff and just fall into the traps of just being a human, I love those books and it's fun to laugh at. So she's really good there. Just super perceptive, super funny, super harsh. Like I love a good harsh book of human character.
I'm
I
writing
like
down the shawl because
The Shaw's
that
great. And
sounds.
also read this is a little bit less of a hot take, more famous, but read also Saul Bellows. He's the author. Mr. Samler's Planet. Great. Fantastic. You should read that too. So I said I did 2/3 fiction, 1/3 nonfiction. So let me give you a nonfiction recommendation. I really enjoyed this one book, but it might be too niche.
There's no such thing for me.
All right, so it's called The Pity of It All, and it's the history of Jews in Germany from like the
Ah,
late 1600s to the just right before the Holocaust. Um, the author's just a little bit, secular Israelis tend to be super condescending to religious people. Um, I didn't even have to Wikipedia his name to know that he's that type. And then I Wikipedia'd his name, like, of course he's a secular
yeah,
Israeli that's
yeah.
condescending. But having said that, and even though he'd probably scoff at my entire existence, it is a fantastic book. He does a really thorough job. I will say it's not. He's a little bit imprecise with the. Um, he's a little imprecise with his subtitle. It isn't a history of Jews in Germany. It's rather a history of famous Jews in Germany. Slightly different because he's like painting a portrait, so he's focusing on like famous poets and authors and politicians and businessmen, but he doesn't like gauge the populace at all, which was frustrating to me because like I wanted to hear what like the regular German Jews were saying and talking and acting and where they were buying and thinking, etc., or whether they were attending synagogue, all that stuff. He wasn't focusing on that, but he takes all the famous Jews pretty much from between the 17th century and the early 20th century, and it's just really well written. You eat it up. It's like super fast paced. I really liked it.
I may have a book recommendation for you depending on are you a familiar and or a fan of the film Casablanca?
I just watched it for the first time like 2 months ago.
Okay. Did you like it or
I think I need to watch it again before I issue an opinion because I know it's such a heavy movie.
yeah, it really is. And of course, for some reason, oh, right here. I've got it. I bought this by accident. I thought this was just a novelization of the book Casablanca, of the movie Casablanca, and novelizations usually go more into detail.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually a sequel, and I did
Oh,
not know that. So I started reading it, and I'm like, wait a minute, why are we? I'm like, okay, maybe we're starting out like in media res after that, and then Rick's going to go through a flashback, and it becomes very clear by about halfway through the first chapter. I'm like, wait a minute, this is after Ilsa and Laszlo get on the plane. So then I was like, oh, this is a sequel. They retcon the character of Rick. I'm not spoiling it for you. It turns out Rick is Jewish,
Huh.
at least in this book. They
I think there was a
retcon and you
reference
get
to, wait, which one is Rick? Is he
the owner of the cafe,
yeah, did they
Humphrey
make a
Bogart.
reference? Yeah, did he make a reference to that in the movie? I have to remember.
I don't recall him making one, and if it was, it might have because Rick's a very dry, sarcastic character. But
Uh-huh.
this book is amazing. It's so good. I can't recommend it enough. It's almost as good as the movie.
All right, I'll
Just
put it at the end of my book queue. I think it's at spot 177.
yeah, you sound like me. No, but it was very interesting because I was like, to your point, it might be referenced in the movie, but at least I didn't pick up on it. So
Mm-hmm.
to me, making Rick, because I think his given name is Yitzhak, he goes by Rick because he ends up becoming involved in the American gangster scene in the 1930s. So
Mm-hmm.
he changes his name to Rick. It adds an incredible extra layer of depth to his character in Casablanca if you are aware of the
Mm,
fact that canonically speaking the character is Jewish. So it makes it a much more
sure.
interesting film knowing that. So
Right.
that's my book recommendation for
Thank
you.
you.
So I kind of didn't want to it's not really a downer, but I guess just kind of like the heaviest question I have for you is do you believe that Christians, Jews, and Muslims can live together and get along in the year 2024?
Absolutely.
Okay, we're on the same page. I figured you would say yes, but
Yeah,
it's one of those
absolutely.
questions you have to
I
ask.
think
Because
I
I
think
mean,
f- I feel like everybody would say yes, where the real disagreement would be is the how. Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. I think the premise of saying that like God exists, or even and and we should be pursuing fulfilling His will and becoming better people generally is like a really great starting point that is probably lost in the shuffle of politics. But we'll get there. Like, on the individual level, on the retail level, it's just been good experiences for sure with Christians because there's like no beef between Jews and Christians currently. But like even with the Muslims that I've been meeting at different occasions, just grabbed a coffee with a Muslim dude last week. It's just been positive. The solutions to the crisis in the Middle East are probably not going to be straightforward, even if you think they're easy. Even if you think that they're straightforward, they're not going to be easy. But for sure, for sure, for sure, in America,
mhm.
I'm super optimistic. And not just optimistic, I think for the most part, we're already there.
I would tend to agree. What I've really come to realize in the past like 10, 15 years or so is that the vocal minority, while they're usually the loudest, they are truly a minority though. The vast majority of people, and I mean, honestly, to a point, the last election kind of proved it, is the silent majority, which is basically all the normal people,
Mm-hmm.
80% of the population, tend to be just very agreeable, kind, like
Yeah. Yeah.
coexistent people who just aren't interested in fighting. At least
Yeah.
not between those sorts of fights. Like, yeah, they'll fight for a good livelihood and their rights and whatnot, but the vast majority of people just want to live their lives and not be bothered and not bother anyone else. And I truly believe that.
Yes, I agree.
So I have taken up more than enough of your time, and I
Yeah, this
greatly
was
appreciate
fun.
it. I agree, and I always extend the invitation. You're more than welcome to come back on anytime you want. You just let me know. But in closing, where can people go if they want to learn more about Judaism?
There are two books that I recommend broadly if they want to learn more about Judaism. One is called Jewish Literacy. It's by Joseph Telushkin. He's great, super thorough, like a little crash course. Each chapter is like 2 or 3 pages, starting from the Bible all the way through modern times. And then that's like the more knowledge trivia base, a lot of it. And then the more like inspirational side of things, a good book for that, even for Gentiles, would be Toward a Meaningful Life. Toward a Meaningful Life by Simon Jacobson. That's another book I recommend a lot, and it's just fantastic and thorough and meaningful and fast, not a difficult read. And then, yeah, you could reach out to me. I'm on all the, if you have like any particular question that you want to ask, you could reach out to me. I'm more than happy to answer. On Instagram, I'm at david.g. You could hear me on the Zal podcast. Yeah, I'm pretty much open in any way, any form of communication. My
Yeah.
window is open to carrier pigeons.
And all his links are in the description below too. So if you want to check any of that out, feel free to do so. Please do. And David, thank you again.
Thank you so
This
much
was
for having me.
this was super fun. I would love to do it again. And let me know if you want to do that yarmulke experiment video. I'm open. I'm down. I will be your Gentile pig, as it were.
That's great. I didn't even know if you intended that alliteration from Guinea, because that's
Oh, I did.
close.
That was the joke.
Okay, nice. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the joke. I guess I can't be a Gentile pig because that wouldn't be kosher.
Well, Gentiles are allowed to eat pigs, even Jewish people.
Fair.
True. All right, brother. I
All
appreciate
right.
you. Also, I just
Have a
learned
good
that you're
one.
in Indianapolis, so we could, even without creating content, we could grab a beer sometime.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I don't drink, but we can definitely grab a drink of some type.
That works as well.
Absolutely. All
All
righty, my
right.
friend. Well, you have a
Take
great
care.
evening. Thank you
You
again
too.
for coming on, and we will talk to you soon.